probably think you know Apple, the iPhone in your pocket, the MacBook on your desk, that shiny logo glowing in the dark. But behind every sleek design and smooth curve lies a story, one filled with wild experiments, secret projects, and near disasters that almost destroyed the company. Imagine this, a billion-dollar empire born in a suburban garage, a computer that spoke before the internet existed, a phone that nearly crashed on stage in front of the entire world. This isn't just the story of gadgets, it's the story of rebellion, obsession, and pure innovation. Today, we're unlocking 30 mind-blowing Apple facts that prove the company you think you know has more secrets than you could ever imagine. Welcome to the Mind Metrics, where we decode the numbers, the myths, and the madness behind the world's biggest ideas. Fact 1. The first Apple logo was Isaac Newton under a tree. Before the famous bitten apple, Apple's very first logo looked more like something from a Victorian encyclopedia. Designed in 1976 by co-founder Ronald Wayne, the image showed Isaac Newton sitting under an apple tree with an apple dangling above his head. Wrapped around the border was an elaborate quote from English poet William Wordsworth, "A mind forever voyaging through strange seas of thought alone." While deeply symbolic, the logo was so detailed that it looked cluttered and impractical when printed small. Steve Jobs quickly decided it didn't reflect the modern, youthful image he wanted Apple to have. Within a year, the ornate design was replaced by the minimalist bitten apple logo we recognize today, a timeless icon of simplicity. Fact 2. The Apple I sold for $666.66, but not for sinister reasons. When Apple launched its first product, the Apple I computer, in 1976, Steve Wozniak set the price at $666.66. People speculated about satanic symbolism, but the real reason was much simpler. Wozniak just liked repeating numbers and found them easier to remember. Each Apple I was hand-built by Wozniak himself on his workbench, while Steve Jobs handled sales and packaging. The machine came as a single circuit board without a case, keyboard, or monitor. Users had to provide those themselves. Only around 200 units were ever made, and they originally sold for just under $700. Today, a functioning Apple I can sell at auction for over $400,000, making it one of the most valuable collector's computers in history. Fact 3. The bite in the Apple logo prevented confusion with a cherry. When designer Rob Janoff created Apple's logo in 1977, he added a bite mark not to symbolize temptation or knowledge, as people often assume, but to make sure it looked like an apple. Without the bite, the fruit's silhouette was too easily mistaken for a cherry or even a tomato. The bite also made the scale recognizable and gave the design a sense of friendliness. The logo's rainbow stripes represented Apple's belief that computers should be fun and accessible, not cold and mechanical. It also subtly nodded to the Apple II's ability to display color graphics, a major innovation at the time. Fact 4. Steve Jobs had an obsession with removing buttons. Jobs famously despised physical buttons. To him, they represented clutter and unnecessary complexity. This design philosophy drove Apple toward touch interfaces long before they were mainstream. Even in the 1980s, Jobs insisted on clean lines, smooth surfaces, and a total absence of visual noise. When the iPhone was first conceived, Jobs initially wanted no buttons at all. The single home button was the result of intense debate between engineers and designers. The idea was to make the device so simple that even a child could use it intuitively. That philosophy still defines Apple's products today. Fewer parts, more purpose. Fact 5. $1,000 in Apple stock in 2003 would be worth over $500,000 today. In 2003, Apple's stock traded at around $1 when adjusted for splits. If you invested $1,000 then, you'd now have over $500,000. This staggering growth was driven by a combination of bold innovation, tight ecosystem control, and a nearly fanatical customer base. At the turn of the millennium, Apple was still recovering from near bankruptcy, But the iPod, released in 2001, and later the iPhone in 2007, completely transformed the company. The introduction of the App Store in 2008 turned Apple from a hardware company into a platform powerhouse. By 2023, Apple became the first company to hit a market valuation of $3 trillion. An unimaginable comeback story in corporate history. Fact 6. The first iPod prototype was the size of a shoebox. When engineers began developing the iPod, it was anything but pocket-sized. Early prototypes were bulky and used off-the-shelf components that made them roughly the size of a shoebox. Steve Jobs demanded something elegant and minimal. He wanted people to carry 1,000 songs in their pocket. The final iPod, released in 2001, used a revolutionary 1.8-inch hard drive from Toshiba that allowed Apple to shrink the design dramatically. Its simple click-wheel interface made browsing songs feel natural. Within 5 years, the iPod wasn't just a product. It was a cultural symbol of the digital music revolution. Fact 7. Apple's philosophy was to combine technology with the liberal arts. Steve Jobs often said, Apple's mission was to sit at the intersection of technology and the liberal arts. This idea defined everything from the typography on Apple devices to the cinematic style of their product presentations. Jobs believed that computers shouldn't just compute, they should inspire. That's why Apple's industrial design team worked like artists, experimenting with materials, proportions, and even the emotional feel of each product. This blend of engineering and artistry created an emotional connection between users and their devices, something few companies have ever achieved. Fact 8. The name Macintosh came from a type of apple. The name Macintosh was suggested by Jeff Raskin, one of Apple's early employees, who loved the Macintosh variety of apple. However, because of legal issues with an existing audio company called Macintosh Laboratory, Apple altered the spelling to Macintosh. When the computer launched in 1984, the name reflected its friendly personality, approachable, simple, and human. Over time, Mac became not just shorthand, but a cultural symbol for creativity and innovation. Fact 9. The original Macintosh had just 128 kilobytes of memory. When the first Macintosh launched, it had a mere 128 kilobytes of RAM. That's smaller than a single modern smartphone photo. Yet this tiny amount of memory powered an entirely graphical user interface, something revolutionary at the time. It introduced features we now take for granted: drag-and-drop icons, windows, and a mouse pointer. The system software was packed so efficiently that Apple engineers joked about fitting an elephant into a shoebox. The Mac's 1984 debut commercial, directed by Ridley Scott, positioned it as a machine that would liberate users from Big Brother, a powerful metaphor for breaking free from IBM's dominance. Fact 10. Siri's voice was recorded. 6 years before the iPhone 4S launched, the voice of Siri, Apple's digital assistant, was recorded by voice actor Susan Bennett in 2005, 6 years before Siri's public debut in 2011. At the time, she had no idea her voice would become globally recognized. She spent weeks recording isolated words, syllables, and sentences so software could algorithmically piece them together into new phrases. When Siri launched, Bennett discovered her voice on TV commercials and was stunned. Apple never publicly confirmed it was her voice until years later. Siri was a technological leap, the first mainstream voice assistant that felt conversational and even witty. Fact 11. Apple Park runs entirely on renewable energy. Apple's futuristic headquarters, Apple Park, located in Cupertino, California, is one of the most sustainable office complexes in the world. The circular building, often nicknamed the Spaceship, covers 175 acres and is powered by 100% renewable energy. Its massive 17-megawatt solar roof generates enough power for over 17,000 homes. The building also uses natural ventilation for 9 months of the year, eliminating most air conditioning needs. Even the landscaping, over 9,000 drought-resistant trees, was designed to restore the local ecosystem. The $5 billion campus is a physical symbol of Apple's commitment to merging design, technology, and environmental responsibility. Fact 12. Apple secretly built a government iPod for nuclear monitoring. In 2005, a classified collaboration took place between Apple and the U.S. Department of Energy's Los Alamos National Laboratory. Two Apple engineers, Tony Fadell and one unnamed colleague, quietly helped the government create a modified iPod that could record secret nuclear data. The device looked and functioned exactly like a normal iPod, but hidden inside was special hardware for detecting and storing radiation readings. The project was so secret that even Apple's upper management didn't know it existed. No prototype or documentation has ever been publicly released. Fact 13. The iPhone was born after a failed Motorola partnership. Before the iPhone, Apple partnered with Motorola to release the ROKR-E1 in 2005, a phone that could play iTunes songs. Unfortunately, it could only store 100 tracks, synced painfully slowly, and had a clunky interface. Steve Jobs was reportedly embarrassed by it. That failure convinced Apple to take full control of hardware and software, leading directly to the iPhone project. 2 years later, the iPhone debuted with its sleek multi-touch screen, and the rest is history. The Motorola ROKR is now remembered as Apple's greatest flop that sparked its greatest triumph. Fact 14. Apple's cash reserves rival entire countries. At various points in the last decade, Apple has held over $200 billion in cash, more than the GDP of nations like Greece or New Zealand. This immense financial cushion gives Apple enormous flexibility to invest in research, buy companies, and weather economic downturns. Apple has used this capital to expand into services like Apple TV Plus, Music, and iCloud, while simultaneously funding massive renewable energy projects around the world. Few corporations in history have ever accumulated so much economic power while maintaining such tight control over their ecosystem. Fact 15. The iMac G3 made computers cool again. When the iMac G3 launched in 1998, it shattered the boring beige computer stereotype. Its translucent colored shell came in shades like Bondi blue, tangerine, and lime, and it featured a handle on top, not for carrying, but for personality. Apple's slogan, "Chic, not geek," perfectly captured its goal of turning computers into lifestyle products. The iMac also ditched floppy drives and switched entirely to USB, a bold move that helped standardize the technology. It sold millions of units and single-handedly saved Apple from financial collapse, setting the stage for the iPod, iPhone, and beyond. Fact 16. Steve Jobs' famous reality distortion field was real and legendary. Within Apple, employees used the term reality distortion field to describe Steve Jobs' uncanny ability to convince people of the impossible. Borrowed from a Star Trek reference, the phrase captured how Jobs could push teams to accomplish tasks they initially thought were unachievable. He often ignored deadlines, dismissed obstacles, and told engineers, "You can do it in 2 weeks," when it really required months. And somehow, they did. This intensity drove Apple's culture of perfection and innovation. While exhausting for employees, it led to breakthroughs like the iMac, iPod, and iPhone. Jobs' charisma blurred the line between motivation and manipulation. But his results spoke for themselves. Fact 17. Apple's first office was literally a garage. But that's not the full story. The story of Apple starting in a garage is true, but also somewhat mythologized. The garage belonged to Steve Jobs' parents in Los Altos, California, and it served more as a symbolic headquarters than a functioning workshop. Steve Wozniak actually built the Apple Omnicomputer mostly in his own apartment and at Hewlett-Packard's facilities, where he worked at the time. The garage was primarily used for final assembly, testing, and meetings with early buyers. Still, the legend of the garage startup became part of Apple's identity, a modern-day origin myth symbolizing creativity, rebellion, and innovation born from humble beginnings. Fact 18. The first iPhone demo almost failed on stage. During the 2007 iPhone unveiling, Steve Jobs showcased calling, music, and internet features live. But behind the scenes, the prototype was barely functional. Engineers had created a fragile, golden path that Jobs had to follow exactly, or the phone would crash. The iPhone couldn't handle running multiple functions in sequence. Its memory leaked constantly, and even battery indicators were manually adjusted to look full. Apple engineers sat in the audience sweating as Jobs flawlessly pulled off one of the most iconic presentations in tech history. A single misstep could have ruined it, but instead, it changed the world. Fact 19. Apple invented the modern touchscreen experience. Before the iPhone, touchscreens existed, but they were clunky, resistive, and required a stylus. Apple's breakthrough was developing a capacitive touchscreen that could sense multiple points of contact simultaneously. This allowed for the invention of multi-touch gestures like pinch to zoom, swipe, and flick, interactions that feel second nature today. Apple's hardware and software integration made it smooth and responsive, creating a tactile, emotional experience. This combination of design and physics turned the touchscreen from a novelty into the standard interface for the modern world. Fact 20. The original Macintosh commercial aired only once, but made history. Apple's 1984 Super Bowl commercial, directed by Ridley Scott, aired only one time nationally, yet it became one of the most famous ads ever made. The one-minute spot depicted a dystopian future inspired by George Orwell's novel 1984, where a lone woman smashes a giant screen displaying Big Brother. The message was clear. Apple's Macintosh was here to challenge conformity and empower the individual. The ad was so powerful that advertising historians still call it the moment modern tech marketing was born. It established Apple not just as a company, but as a cultural movement. Fact 21. Steve Jobs' favorite design principle was, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." This phrase, originally by Leonardo da Vinci, became Jobs' guiding philosophy. Apple's designers interpreted it literally. Every curve, color, and interface element had to earn its place. Jobs hated unnecessary features, cluttered menus, and anything that confused users. That's why early Apple products often had fewer options than competitors. He believed true sophistication wasn't about complexity, it was about clarity. This philosophy gave Apple products their Zen-like simplicity and made them instantly recognizable worldwide. Fact 22. Apple once made a digital camera, and it flopped. Before the iPhone's world-class cameras, Apple tried its hand at photography with the 1994 QuickTake 100. It was one of the first consumer digital cameras capable of capturing 8 photos at a resolution of just 640 by 480 pixels. Despite being ahead of its time, the QuickTake failed commercially. People weren't ready for digital photography, and the camera's $749 price tag was too high. Apple discontinued the line in 1997 when Steve Jobs returned to the company. Ironically, Apple's later integration of cameras into phones made it one of the biggest forces in photography history. Fact 23. Apple nearly went bankrupt in the 1990s. By 1997, Apple was just 90 days from running out of cash. Its products were underperforming, and leadership was in disarray. Then, in a surprising twist, rival Microsoft invested $150 million to help stabilize the company. This wasn't charity. It was strategic. Microsoft wanted to keep Apple alive to avoid antitrust scrutiny from monopolizing the computer market. Jobs used that lifeline to restructure Apple, cancel failing projects, and focus on design. Within a decade, Apple went from near bankruptcy to the world's most valuable company. Fact 24. Apple's packaging design is a science of emotion. Apple doesn't just design products, it designs experiences, right down to the unboxing. The packaging is engineered to create anticipation and satisfaction. Designers even test how slowly the iPhone box lid slides open to control the reveal moment. Every element, from the sound of the box lifting to the smooth, matte finish of the materials, is intentional. The company employs a team specifically focused on packaging psychology, ensuring the first impression feels premium, personal, and almost ceremonial. It's why opening an Apple product feels like a ritual. Fact 25. The Mac startup chime was designed as an emotional reset. The familiar bong sound you hear when a Mac powers on isn't random. It was designed by Apple engineer Jim Reeks to signify that the system had successfully passed its hardware test, a reassurance to the user that everything was okay. Reeks intentionally made the tone musical and soothing, creating what he called a sonic hug. The sound became so iconic that it's been used in films, remixes, and even as a wake-up alarm tone. It embodies Apple's belief that every detail, even sound, should feel human. Fact 26. Apple's secret design lab is one of the most guarded places in tech. Inside Apple Park lies a sealed-off section where only select designers are allowed. The Industrial Design Studio. Access requires security clearance, and even many Apple employees have never seen it. This lab houses cutting-edge 3D printers, precision milling machines, and secret prototype models under black cloths. The walls are lined with materials used for texture testing: aluminum, ceramic, glass, and carbon fiber. Every iPhone, MacBook, and watch design begins here, often years before it reaches the public. Fact 27. Apple's Think Different campaign was a tribute to rebels. In 1997, Apple launched the Think Different campaign to reintroduce its brand after years of decline. The ads featured black and white portraits of history's visionaries: Albert Einstein, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Amelia Earhart, and others. With the simple tagline, "Think Different," the campaign's message was that Apple wasn't just selling computers, it was celebrating creativity and individuality. It redefined Apple's identity and marked the beginning of its cultural renaissance, leading directly into the iMac and iPod eras. Fact 28. Apple once hid an Easter egg in the iPod credits. If you scrolled through the About section on some early iPods, you'd find a hidden mini-game called Breakout, a tribute to a 1976 arcade game co-created by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak before they founded Apple. The inclusion of Breakout wasn't just nostalgia. It was a symbol of how Apple's roots in playful, experimental design continued even in its most polished modern devices. It reminded fans that behind the sleek aluminum and glass, Apple was still a company that loved to surprise. Fact 29. The iPhone's name was almost taken by Cisco. When Apple announced the iPhone in 2007, another company already owned the name. Cisco had a product called the iPhone, which was a VoIP device for internet calling. For weeks after Apple's reveal, the two companies were locked in a legal dispute. Rather than rebrand, Apple reached a quick settlement, allowing both to use the name. Cisco's version disappeared quietly, while Apple's iPhone became a global phenomenon. It's one of the rare cases where marketing confidence won over legal obstacles. Fact 30. Steve Jobs' last big project was Apple Park. Before his passing in 2011, Steve Jobs personally oversaw the design of Apple Park, the company's circular spaceship headquarters. He worked with architect Norman Foster to ensure the building embodied Apple's design philosophy: simplicity, beauty, and environmental harmony. Every aspect, from the curved glass panels, the largest in the world, to the custom-designed door handles, was approved by Jobs himself. He wanted Apple Park to reflect not just innovation, but humanity, a physical manifestation of Apple's soul. Today, employees describe walking into it as stepping into Steve's final masterpiece. From garage beginnings to global domination, Apple's story is more than just technology. It's proof that bold ideas can reshape the world. Every chip, every click, every curve of glass carries a piece of that vision, a belief that innovation should feel almost magical. So the next time you unlock your iPhone or boot up your Mac, remember, you're holding decades of creativity, obsession, and risk in your hands. If you learned something new today, hit that like button, subscribe to the Mind Metrics, and join us as we keep uncovering the hidden stories behind the world's biggest breakthroughs. Because here, curiosity isn't just power, it's the future. Thanks for watching, and like always, stay curious.